The frigid February morning of 2011 began with an unusual commotion on Gracie Lake Drive, north of the town of Millbrook, Michigan. 5 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a small gray brick house on the outskirts of Grand Rapids. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, watching as officers in bulletproof vests fanned out around the yard, their breath dissolving into the biting cold air. Inside, Colin Dudley, 62 years old, was brewing his morning coffee, a habit he had maintained for decades since leaving the Ford factory. A rapid knock echoed at 7:15 a.m. Mr. Colin Dudley, Michigan State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Sarah Cantrell, Millbrook, 1973. One officer later recalled that his hand trembled slightly as he set down the coffee cup, but his gaze remained calm to the point of chilling, as if, for nearly 40 years, he had been waiting for this very moment. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The town of Millbrook, Michigan, winter of 1973. A small community nestled among snow-covered cornfields, where every road led to Gracie Lake, the thickly frozen lake surface gleaming with a cold silver sheen under the leaden sky. The town's breath seemed to slow with each gust of wind, whipping over wooden rooftops and snow-draped white fences. At the end of Maple Road, in a small cream-colored house, Sarah Cantrell, 23 years old, was preparing to leave home. She was a final-year nursing student at Monroe Community College, gentle, quiet, and close to everyone in the neighborhood. Sarah lived with her mother, Mrs. Marie Cantrell, a widowed woman who worked as a librarian at the town library. The lives of the mother and daughter were steady and simple, measured in mornings scented with coffee and quiet evenings by the fireplace. That morning, snow began falling heavily from early on, blanketing the porch roof and the path in front of the house in white. Sarah slipped on her thick red sweater, put on a knit hat, donned an old pair of gloves, and carried a small bag with cookies and a coffee cup that she intended to take to her neighbor, Mrs. Elena Vance, a woman in her 60s, living alone in the house across the street. She stepped out onto the porch, paused for a moment, then crossed the yard through the hazy snow. Light from Vance's window spilled onto her, reflecting as a faint red streak. Mrs. Vance watched through the glass pane, seeing Sarah turn back with a smile and wave before vanishing behind the thick snow. That was the last time anyone saw her. Noon passed in silence, the snowstorm intensified, and the town nearly ground to a halt. By evening, when streetlights cast a yellow glow on the wet snow, Marie realized her daughter had not returned. At first, she thought Sarah might be staying at a friend's or stuck on the road, but the clock struck 8, then 9, with no sign of her. Marie walked through each room, softly calling her daughter's name, then stopped at the bedroom window overlooking the front yard. The morning footprints already buried under fresh snow. On the table, Sarah's left-behind coffee cup still held traces of steam, and her spare coat hung neatly behind the door. A growing unease spread, and Marie called a few acquaintances, asking if anyone had seen Sarah that day, but no one had. She dialed Mrs. Vance's house, then a friend's in town, and all gave the same answer: no one had seen her since morning. The small house fell silent, broken only by the tick of the clock and the wind howling outside the door. Marie stood for a long time by the wall-mounted phone, her trembling hand on the receiver. Finally, she dialed the Millbrook police station. When the duty officer picked up, her voice choked, trying to stay calm as she said, "I want to report, my daughter is missing. She went out this morning and hasn't come back." The duty officer at the Millbrook police station noted down every word, then asked a few basic details before transferring the call to the shift supervisor. 5 minutes later, the report reached Inspector Bill Harden, who was on night duty at headquarters. He immediately prepared, put on a thick coat, grabbed his notebook, and left the station. Maple Road was almost devoid of vehicles, with snow-laden winds slashing through the treetops, blanketing the road surface. When he arrived, The dashboard clock read nearly 10 p.m. The Cantrell family's small house appeared in the dim yellow light, smoke from the chimney drifting sideways in the wind. Mrs. Marie opened the door for him, her face tense and hands ice cold. Hardin greeted her briefly and began his work. He asked about the time Sarah left home, described her clothing, items she took, and any other details that could help narrow the timeline. Mrs. Marie spoke evenly, but with a tremor. Sarah had only gone to the neighbors that morning, without a purse, money, or papers. She left her wallet and spare coat in the house, planning to return in a few minutes. Hardin took notes, then walked around the house observing. No signs of forced entry, disturbed furniture, or struggle. Everything was tidy. In Sarah's room, the bed was made, study books neatly stacked on the desk, next to a cooled teacup and some nursing documents. He bent down to check the remaining shoes in the closet. Only the red boots were missing. Hardin went out to the porch, shining his flashlight along the path. Fresh snow had fallen thickly, but he could still make out a few small, even, straight indentations leading toward the main road. He crouched down, estimating by eye size about 6 or 7, fitting Sarah's build. He marked the position in his notebook, then stepped down into the yard, surveying the surrounding area. No tire tracks, no drag marks, just the wind sweeping thin layers of snow over the remaining footprints. After finishing the check, Hardin radioed headquarters, reporting the case as missing with unusual factors and requesting a patrol team. 2 police cars were dispatched, coordinating with him to sweep the area around the house and routes leading off Maple Street. They fanned out searching, flashing lights over lawns, forest edges, and the sloping road down to Gracie Lake. Near the turnoff, a young officer spotted the footprints continuing toward the lake. Hardin examined closely. Indeed, women's boot prints, matching the style Sarah usually wore. He measured the stride with a ruler, noting coordinates on the topographic map. Snow kept falling heavily, winds whipping white sheets, quickly blurring the prints. Hardin ordered a temporary halt to tracking in the dark due to limited visibility, leaving only wooden stakes to mark the area. When he returned to the Cantrell house, the clock had ticked past 1 a.m. Mrs. Marie was still sitting at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the window. Hardin reported that they had determined Sarah's initial direction of movement, but would wait until morning to expand the search. He instructed her to keep the phone nearby and call immediately if anything came up. Outside, the snowstorm howled through the pines, adding another fresh white layer to the yard, gradually erasing the last remaining footprints of Sarah Cantrell. As the first light of morning faintly filtered through thick clouds, the snow had not stopped. The search team resumed at 7 a.m., consisting of 4 local police, 2 rescue volunteers, and a standby ambulance. Inspector Hardin directly commanded at the scene. They split into 2 groups, one sweeping along Maple Road, the other expanding southward toward Gracie Lake, where faint prints had been spotted the night before. Continuous overnight snow had erased most traces, but Hardin persistently probed each section, walking and noting, sometimes stopping to measure the depth of old indentations in the snow. Around 9 a.m., a rescue worker named Walter Pierce discovered a strange object at a bend less than half a mile from the lake shore. Beneath about 4 inches of snow, the white hood of a car protruded, covered in frosty haze. When they cleared the snow from the hood, the license plate read clearly, B2147M, matching the registration for Sarah Cantrell's Ford Pinto. Hardin immediately ordered the area sealed, stringing caution tape around the trail entrance. The car was parked askew to one side, nose pointing toward the lake, front wheels nearly touching the ice edge. The doors were unlocked, keys still in the ignition, gear in park. Inside, the front seats were upright, no signs of struggle or breakage. The floor was clean, with only a bit of snow drifted in through door cracks. Hardin opened the back door, no luggage, no purse, no coat. The trunk was empty, except for a thin blue blanket and an empty paper bag that had held cookies. He noted every detail's position, photographed the whole from 4 angles, then numbered them per standard procedure. A crime scene technician checked for fingerprints, but almost nothing was clear. The metal surfaces frozen and condensed. Hardin circled the car, observing the snow around it. On the right side, a few faint footprints led away from the vehicle, then vanished amid wind-tossed snow patches. He crouched to measure stride, estimating size matching the women's boots noted the night before. No other tire tracks nearby, no signs of towing or collision. An officer logged time and coordinates, while Hardin used a Polaroid camera for close-ups of the plate, door locks, dashboard, and driver's seat. The entire area was sealed with yellow tape. The rescue team checked another 200 meters along the lakeshore, but found nothing beyond wind patterns and some broken branches. When the police tow truck arrived, Hardin ordered the vehicle moved to the county impound for investigation. Before letting it go, he observed one last time, noting in his book, no signs of struggle, no blood, no suspicious evidence, locks undamaged. To him, the most notable was the parking spot, the Pinto in a place few stopped, far from the main road, no homes nearby. Checking the gas gauge, it read nearly full, showing Sarah had no fuel issues. The driver's window was cracked open a bit, possibly from wind or someone opening it before leaving. Hardin stood silent for a long while, gazing at the misty white lake ahead, where cold vapors rose in curls, frosting the pines. He clearly sensed the absurdity of the scene. The car intact, everything orderly, but the driver vanished without a trace. By nearly noon, the entire scene was fully documented. Hardin returned to Millbrook headquarters with the initial files, filed an official report, and classified the case as unusual missing person, active case. This was no longer a simple lost contact, but an inexplicable disappearance in the heart of a small Michigan town, on a quiet winter day in 1973. That afternoon, after the Ford Pinto was towed from the scene, the search around Gracie Lake was expanded. Part of the lake area was sealed off. Access paths to the shore were cordoned with caution tape and numbered. Inspector Bill Hardin coordinated with the county rescue team and a K-9 unit from Lansing. The snow had stopped falling, but cold winds still whipped in gusts, causing the ice on the lake to crackle. On the flat white ice surface, only the searchers' footprints were scattered, mixed with shovel gouges and probe marks. Hardin divided the team into 3 groups. The first swept the trail leading down to the lake. The second checked the eastern shore area with the pumping station, and the last used small boats to slide over the thin ice to survey the middle of the lake. The tracking dogs were given a piece of fabric from Sarah's car seat to scent, a female named Margot, trained for snow disappearances. She sniffed around the area where the car was found, let out a few short yips, then began following a single direction to the lake edge. Her paws formed a curving arc, but upon reaching the ice boundary she stopped, barked loudly, and circled. The handler tried twice more, the result unchanged. The scent trail ended right at the line between land and ice. Hardin noted the position, drove a wooden stake as a marker, and labeled on the map, Marker A, end of scent trail. He looked out over the lake, murky cold vapors rising, far off the silhouette of the old Ford plant, rusted tin roof flickering behind the pines. The factory complex had been abandoned for nearly 4 years since the assembly line shut down. Many locals said no one went there in winter due to slippery roads and roof collapse risks. Around 3 p.m., Hardin received new information from a witness, the night shift worker at the lake pumping station, named Alan Miller. He reported that around 5 p.m. the previous day, as snow began falling, he saw vehicle headlights heading toward the Ford plant area. "I thought it was a system check truck," Miller said, "but it never came back." Hardin immediately went to verify with Miller. The pumping station sat on a low hill, overlooking the trail connecting to the plant. From the control room window, the view was clear enough to catch headlight reflections on the ice if a vehicle passed. Miller confirmed the light was not a truck, but a small car, light-colored, matching Sarah's Pinto. Hardin noted the statement, adding a large circled area south of the lake on the search map, extending to the old factory buildings. By late afternoon, he directed the search team to focus efforts there. They used shovels and metal detectors to sweep the factory entrance, where snow was nearly half a meter deep. Inside, rusted iron doors, concrete floor pitted with glass shards and nails, remnants of past production. Stacks of rotted wooden crates lay scattered, snow-covered, no fresh traces. Flashlights swept everywhere, revealing only cobwebs and thick dust. One officer reported some old men's shoe prints near the back wall, but the snow was hardened ice, impossible to date. Hardin ordered photos, shoe print samples, then sealed. After nearly 3 hours of sweeping, the rescue team found no further traces related to Sarah, no personal items, no blood, no struggle signs. Before leaving the scene, Hardin paused at the factory entrance, looking toward the lake. The sky pale gray, wind stirring snow like thin smoke, distant metal creaking eerily. He found it hard to explain the car parked just dozens of meters from the lake, with no signs anyone left the area. In his duty log, Hardin wrote briefly, "Expanded search around Gracie Lake, no results. Scent trail ends at Ice Edge. Notable witness tip, vehicle lights afternoon of 2/24 toward Old Ford plant." He closed the book, ordered a halt before dark. As the convoy left, the lake returned to absolute silence. Only small wooden stakes around the water's edge. The sole sign this place had been the center of a desperate search in Millbrook's freezing winter. The next day, snow still hadn't melted, but news of Sarah Cantrell's disappearance had spread throughout Millbrook. Police continued sweeping around Gracie Lake and expanded witness interviews within a 3-mile radius. Inspector Bill Hardin directed officers to every household along Maple Road and small shops on Main Street to collect statements. Most residents said they hadn't seen Sarah since the morning she vanished, except for a grocery store owner named Harold Thompson, who claimed to have seen a woman resembling her that afternoon. Thompson owned Millbrook General, at the corner of Main and 7th, about 2 miles from Gracie Lake. When questioned, he was certain because heavy snow that day meant few customers. According to him, around 4 p.m., a young woman in a red coat and white knit scarf entered with a man in a black fedora. They stopped at the candy counter, spoke softly, then left after a few minutes. She smiled when I greeted her. The man said nothing. Thompson recounted, "I remember because she had bright eyes, and the way she held the coffee cup seemed hurried." When Hardin showed Sarah's photo, he immediately recognized, "That's her, no mistake." What caught Hardin's attention was the man, described as about half a head taller than Sarah, slightly thin, dark coat, gloves. The standout detail was the black fedora, rare in Millbrook, where people wore knit caps or baseball hats in winter. Hardin recorded the full statement, asked Thompson to describe the man's face in detail: high nose bridge, square chin, clean-shaven, around 30 plus. He also confirmed the time about 4:15 p.m., less than an hour before the pumping station worker saw headlights toward the old Ford plant. The coincidence intrigued Hardin. He had Thompson sign the statement and fill out a witness description form. Then, Hardin and a police sketch artist went to the store, with Thompson helping reconstruct the fedora man's portrait. After nearly 2 hours, the first sketch was done. A long-faced man, high nose, dark eyes, wide-brimmed fedora. Hardin examined it closely, then took the drawing back to headquarters, comparing with Millbrook and nearby town resident files. No matches. He continued checking vehicle registrations, driver's licenses, and criminal records in Gracie County. No one with similar features. In the report to the investigation chief, Hardin noted clearly, identity does not match local residents, possibly from outside the area. By afternoon, he printed 10 copies of the sketch and distributed to stores, gas stations, post office, diners around town. An official notice was posted at Millbrook headquarters, seeking male witness, approx. 35 years old. Average height, black fedora. Last seen with Sarah Cantrell at Millbrook General Grocery, approx. 4:15 p.m. on February 24, 1973. While officers posted notices around town, Hardin returned to the Cantrell home to update. Mrs. Marie listened silently, hands clasped. When he mentioned the fedora man, she froze briefly, then shook her head. "I don't know anyone like that," Sarah had no boyfriend here. Hardin nodded, added to his notes. He knew this detail might be the only lead, or just coincidence. But in a traceless disappearance, any snippet held value. That day the full search force continued around the lake. Officers swept the route from the grocery to the car discovery site, seeking witnesses who might have seen the pair's transportation, but no one recalled. Thick snow had erased all traces. At dusk, Hardin returned to headquarters, pinning the Fedora Man's sketch to the main bulletin board, right under the Millbrook town map. He stared at the drawing long, vague face, just lines on paper, but the eyes seemed cold and empty. Hardin wrote at the end of that day's report, "Witness confirms Sarah seen afternoon 2/24 with black Fedora Man, identity unknown. Need expanded verification." Then he closed the book, leaned back in his chair, listening to the wind howl through the station's window frames, Millbrook's familiar winter sound, now suddenly heavy. In the following days, the investigation expanded beyond Millbrook. Inspector Bill Hardin ordered a full check of Sarah Cantrell's relationships, from friends, nursing school colleagues, to old acquaintances. Reviewing her personal files and medical records and library registers, Hardin noticed a name recurring in prior years. Colin Dudley, an old classmate of Sarah's, said they had dated briefly in early 1972, when Dudley was an engineer at the Ford plant in Dearborn, nearly 2 hours' drive from Millbrook. After breaking up, Sarah rarely mentioned him, but occasionally received letters. Hardin contacted Ford's HR to verify. Records showed Colin P. Dudley, born 1944, mechanical engineer residing in Ypsilanti, Michigan. No criminal record, no work violations. When summoned for statement, Dudley arrived on time, calm, neatly dressed in a gray coat and black fedora. His movements slow, somewhat reserved. In the record, Dudley stated he hadn't seen Sarah in nearly a year. "We dated," he said, "but parted amicably. I knew nothing of her disappearance until police contacted me." Hardin pressed on their last meeting. Dudley vaguely replied, "Around April last year, at a cafe near the nursing school." He claimed no contact since. Asked if he'd been to Millbrook the week Sarah vanished, Dudley immediately denied, saying he was working the morning shift at Ford Dearborn until 6 p.m. Hardin remained neutral, recorded the statement, but in his personal notes underlined, "Black fedora." The grocery witness description matched eerily. After the interview, Hardin requested verification of Dudley's shift on February 24th. 3 days later, HR sent the timecard copy. Data showed morning presence, but the out-time column blank. A small margin note, "Left shift early, personal reason." Hardin called the shift supervisor, Robert Neal, who confirmed Dudley asked to leave around 2 p.m., saying personal matter. Neal added, he didn't return that day, only back next morning, looking tired and quieter than usual. Asked if this was common, Neal shook his head. No. Dudley was always punctual, never left mid-shift. The detail intrigued Hardin. He compared timelines. Sarah last seen at the grocery around 4:15 p.m. Pumping station witness saw headlights around then. If Dudley left Dearborn at 2, he could reach Millbrook in just over 2 hours, right on time. Hardin wrote in the report, "Need further verification of Colin Dudley's personal itinerary on 2/24." He checked suspect vehicle registration and found Dudley owned a silver-gray Chevrolet plate series similar to one noted in Gracie County. However, no witness confirmed plate or model in Millbrook that day. When summoned again, Dudley remained calm. He provided additional evidence of stopping at a coworker's house in Ypsilanti that afternoon. But the friend, when asked, only recalled a late-night call, no in-person meeting. Inconsistencies in statements heightened Hardin's suspicion, yet everything remained hypothetical. No witness placed Dudley in Millbrook. No physical evidence at the scene linked him to Sarah's car or Gracie Lake area. In the report to superiors, Hardin noted, subject Colin Dudley has suspicious unaccounted time on victim's disappearance day. Statements, inconsistent. Recommend discreet surveillance. He filed the timecard copy in the case file and pinned the Fedora Man sketch beside it. In a small town where everyone knew each other, a name from Dearborn sparked whispers, but to Hardin, it was all leads without enough weight. He knew suspicion without evidence was just void, and that void, in the Sarah Cantrell case, was larger than ever. 2 days after Colin Dudley's statement, Inspector Bill Hardin decided to return to the old Ford plant by Gracie Lake, where the pumping station witness reported seeing headlights. He wanted to verify if anyone had been there around Sarah Cantrell's disappearance. Early morning, snow less thick, sun peeking through gray clouds, pale light over peeling concrete walls. The plant stood isolated from the main road, about 400 meters from the shore, surrounded by rusted fence and old pines. From afar, the building loomed, tin roof patchy with holes, shattered windows, the sign Ford Motor Division, Millbrook Assembly, still hanging crooked, letters faded. Accompanying Hardin were 2 officers and a technical photographer. They trudged through uneven snow, pushed open the heavy rusted iron door, hinges screeching. Smell of iron, dust, and old oil wafted out, thick in the air. Inside was a vast space, high ceiling, light through broken panes, casting hazy streaks on the cement floor. Hardin swept his flashlight across the main shop, once the vehicle assembly line. Cold concrete floor, with long scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged. He signaled the photographer to capture, then bent to examine scratches fresh, surrounding dust disturbed, indicating recent activity. Nearby, he spotted shoe prints in the thick dust. Large size, likely men's. One officer measured and sampled soil, while Hardin noted time, position, and marked with wooden stakes. Deeper in, signs of presence grew clearer. A few empty soda cans, fresh cigarette butts, and an old tarp spread against the wall. The tarp still damp, as if recently removed. A wall corner had a faint handprint in the dust. No Sarah items, no papers or belongings. But these traces made Hardin sense this was not just harmless abandonment. He ordered full shop photos, then moved to the Old West offices. Wooden door creaked open. Inside 3 small rooms, floors littered with glass shards and paper scraps. On a desk, a rusted calendar frame stuck at 1969. One officer found shoe prints extending from the hallway into the last room, where light slanted through a broken window in a dull yellow band. There, more fresh scratches on the cement, about 2 meters long, mixed with paint flakes and metal gouges. Hardin knelt with a ruler, noted, drag marks of heavy object, direction toward back door. Opening the rear door, cold wind rushed in, stirring fine dust. Outside, a narrow path led straight to the lake. At the concrete stairs base, a few small snow indentations, old but shoe-shaped. Hardin probed the ice depth near shore with a stick, added distance from back door to lake edge, 60 meters, suspicious area. He had the entire rear door row photographed, then returned to the main shop to complete the report. Reviewing the fresh Polaroids, light highlighted the scratches more, like parallel claw marks, indicating a hard-edged object dragged. The photographer suggested collecting metal residue from the floor for analysis. Hardin agreed. They bagged a small piece, less than 2 centimeters long, silver gray, slightly textured surface. He sealed it in an evidence bag and signed. Before leaving the plant, Hardin circled the building. From the back view, the full Gracie Lake lay still in mist, ice glinting faintly in late afternoon light. He stood there long, tracing the examined back door line, trying to envision what might have happened. A sense something lurked beneath the absolute calm weighed on him. As the team returned to headquarters, Hardin organized all scene photos, notes, and samples in the case envelope. He wrote the end-of-day summary, Old Ford Plant, signs of recent activity. Men's shoe prints, heavy object drag marks, small metal object. No body or victim-related items found, possible connection to disappearance. The final line he underlined, ink darker than usual. Then Hardin closed the file, labeled Gracie, Ford Plant Investigation, and placed it in the top steel cabinet drawer. Outside the window, night had fallen. All of Millbrook sank into silence. only wind whistling through the old tin rows at the plant, echoing in steady pulses like the faint breath of a place hiding something yet unseen. In the weeks following the search of the old Ford factory, no new clues were found. The search team continued to comb around Lake Gracie and the adjacent woods. But the melting spring snow only revealed bare ground and a few old pieces of wood. The search markers, placed by Hardin, were all thoroughly checked. No trace of Sarah Cantrell or any personal belongings. The State Investigation Lab sent back the analysis results of the metal sample collected at the factory, but it was just a piece of unidentified rusted steel. The male shoe prints on the concrete floor could not be matched to any samples in the database. The leads that once existed, the man in the black fedora, the abandoned Ford Bestow, and the vehicle lights seen by the witness, all became meaningless as nothing connected them. Hardin's reports grew thicker week by week, but they were just empty pages, noting the weather, the lake's condition, and the negative results of the searches. Increasingly, the case sank into the exhaustion of the entire force. By early April, rescue costs and manpower had exceeded the Millbrook Police Department's annual budget. The Gracie County headquarters ordered a halt to wide-scale search operations, shifting to passive monitoring status, meaning action only if new information emerged. Hardin objected during the internal meeting, but there was no other choice. He still kept full copies of all crime scene photos, notes, and statements in a private drawer at his office, hoping one day to return to it. In the final report submitted to the county, he wrote briefly, "No body, no authentic evidence, victim still missing. Criminal element not ruled out, but currently lacking legal basis to continue criminal investigation." Afterward, the official file was transferred to long-term storage. From then on, Sarah Cantrell's name gradually disappeared from local news. In early summer 1974, the Gracie County office issued the final notice, "No evidence found indicating the victim is still alive." File temporarily closed with status, missing, presumed dead. The Cantrell family received a copy of the decision, a cold sheet of paper with a red stamp, while no one could say exactly what had happened. Hardin still occasionally visited Lake Gracie, sometimes just standing to gaze at the water, reflecting the gloomy sky, trying to find a sign he might have missed. He knew all investigative avenues had been exhausted. No new witnesses, no signs of crime, no DNA traces or other suspicious objects. Even the old Ford factory, the only place still raising suspicion, had been permanently sealed, preparing for partial demolition to prevent roof collapse. In the months that followed, life in Millbrook gradually returned to normal. The local papers stopped covering it, and people only occasionally mentioned the disappearance when strangers asked for Hardin. The case never truly closed, even though the file had. He still kept a full copy of all investigative documents in his personal cabinet, including Polaroid photos, scene notes, and the sketch of the man in the fedora. Every time he passed the cabinet, he paused a moment, wondering if he had overlooked something. But as years passed, memories of Sarah Cantrell faded in the minds of those who had participated in the search. Millbrook entered a new summer. Lake Gracie turned green again, so peaceful that no one believed it had once been the center of an unsolved disappearance. And in the small office at the police station, the thin file numbered 7341 lay quietly on the shelf, its cover faded yellow, Hardin's handwritten line still clear, Cantrell Sarah, missing, case unresolved. After Sarah Cantrell's file was temporarily closed in the summer of 1974, the case quickly fell into oblivion. In the Gracie County Storage Archive, the file numbered 7341 was placed in the fourth drawer of the gray metal cabinet row, sandwiched between hundreds of other minor cases, mostly traffic accidents and temporary disappearances. On the cover, the stamp "missing," presumed dead in red ink, had begun to fade over the years. Those working in the archive later hardly knew the contents inside, only glancing at it during periodic inventories. Time passed, new cases continued to pile up, pushing old files deeper into the shadows of the rusted drawers. Each time it was opened, The smell of damp paper and iron dust mixed into a stifling atmosphere of buried memories. Yet, inside the original envelope, all evidence remained intact: a few brown hairs collected from Sarah's car seat, Polaroid photos of the scene by Lake Gracie, copies of the grocery store witness statements, and the inspection report of the old Ford factory area, all sealed and signed by Inspector Bill Hardin, the only one who still remembered every detail. In the 1980s, when DNA testing began to be mentioned at professional conferences, Hardin once submitted a request to re-examine the hair samples in the Cantrell case, but the file was denied for lack of legal basis and provable results. At that time, budgets for old cases were virtually non-existent, and Millbrook was just a small town without the resources to reopen an investigation. Sarah Cantrell's disappearance gradually became a faint line in the statistics: an unsolved case, no suspect, no victim's body. Hardin continued working until the end of 2003, when he officially retired after 35 years in the field. The farewell was simple in the small police station meeting room. Colleagues congratulated him, and he just smiled kindly, avoiding mention of unresolved cases. But that evening, while packing to leave the office, Hardin opened his private cabinet and took out file 7341, which he had kept a copy of in the bottom drawer. The cover was worn, edges yellowed, but the handwriting was still clear. He flipped through the pages: photos of the snow-covered Ford Pinto, the sketch of the man in the fedora, search reports around the lake, and the final report dated June 18, 1974. On the last page, Hardin added a note in blue ink: firm handwriting, no evidence she ever left the Lake Gracie area. The short line, but it contained the obsession he could never shake. In the years after retirement, local papers occasionally reprinted compilations of unsolved disappearances in Gracie County, including Sarah Cantrell's name. Readers skimmed it like a curious blurb on the last page, no one remembering the young woman's face who vanished in that year's snowstorm. And Hardin, whenever driving past Lake Gracie, still pulled over for a moment, looking at the calm water and wondering if beneath that ice lay the answer he had sought for half his life. Many said he couldn't let go because it was the first case he couldn't solve. Others thought, for Hardin, it wasn't just duty but a spiritual debt. In his small wooden house on the outskirts of Lansing, he still kept a private drawer for old files, with 7341 always on top, next to the long-defunct Polaroid camera. Once a year, he took it out to dust, reorganizing each page, like a small ritual for the lost who had not been found. Sometimes, in quiet nights, Hardin opened his old notebook, reread his final line, then quietly repeated in his mind, "No evidence she ever left the lake area." 40 years after Sarah Cantrell disappeared, the case seemed to have sunk completely into oblivion. But in early 2011, the Michigan Department of Justice began implementing a program to review cold cases, unsolved files with stored evidence. The project, called the Cold Case Initiative, was handled by the State Investigation Office, aiming to apply modern forensic technology to recover, compare, and analyze old samples. Among hundreds of files transferred to the Lansing Testing Center, the disappearance coded 7341, Cantrell, Sarah quickly caught the attention of young technician Naomi Pike. She was an evidence analyst specializing in degraded DNA processing, having participated in many long-term storage sample recovery programs. While reviewing the Gracie County Evidence Catalog, Pike noted that the Cantrell file was rare in remaining intact. The sealed envelope still had the original lead seal, containing 3 unidentified hairs, 5 Polaroid photos, and 2 fabric pieces from the car seat. For a disappearance from the early 1970s, such preservation was uncommon. Pike immediately noted it on the priority list, marking potential DNA viability. She sent a request to management for permission to open the file for reanalysis. 3 weeks later, the Cold Case Project Committee approved. On March 15, 2011, Sarah Cantrell's file was officially withdrawn from storage, the first time since 1974. Pike carefully opened each envelope in the evidence processing room. The smell of old paper mixed with rust, rose faintly but distinctly. The 3 brown hairs were wrapped in wax paper, tied with cotton string per old protocol, with a handwritten note, collected from front seat of Ford Pinto, February 26, 1973. B. Hardin. Beneath the paper were 5 faded yellow Polaroid photos, images of the snow-covered car, license plate B2147M, and 2 inside the vehicle. In one, light reflected on the foggy windshield like a human shadow. Pike used a digital scanner to capture all at high resolution for system storage. When viewing on screen, details blurred in the original became clearer, like a shadow of someone standing in front of the hood, face unclear. That feeling made Pike pause. She opened her notebook, writing briefly, "Possible reflection, to be enhanced." After scanning, Pike moved to biological evidence evaluation. By eye, she saw the hairs were old but still had follicles, key for nuclear DNA extraction. She requested preliminary analysis from the Central Lansing Forensic Lab. While waiting, Pike began reading the entire original file. Each investigation report by Inspector Bill Hardin was typed on thin paper, edges yellowed, but meticulously detailed shoe print positions, wind direction, distance from car door to ice edge. Amid the cold lines, Pike noticed Hardin's handwritten margin note, "No evidence she ever left the Lake Gracie area." She read it several times, then noted beside it, "Investigator had strong intuition about lake area, maybe direction to re-examine." Curious about the man who wrote those lines, Pike searched the internal system and found Hardin had retired nearly 10 years ago, living on the outskirts of Lansing. Still, his personal contact was in the former employee list. Pike decided to call. When she introduced the cold case review program, Hardin's voice on the other end was slow but firm. "I know that case," he said. "Sarah Cantrell. I've kept a copy of the file for 40 years. She never left the lake, I believe that." Pike scheduled a meeting for the weekend to consult original information. That afternoon she completed the reopening report, assigning new state number, Case 11C 2041. The summary report was sent to the Michigan State Investigation Office with comment, "File has intact evidence, high potential for DNA analysis. Recommend state-level reinvestigation." In the notes, Pike added her own line. "Original lead investigator, Bill Hardin, alive, willing to assist. Should utilize field knowledge and old notes." When procedures were done, she looked through the lab window, early spring snow falling lightly on the glass roof. It felt like the circle of time was opening again, taking her back to a February morning in 1973. The day Sarah Cantrell left home and never returned. Pike closed the file, signing, "Case reopened, March 15, 2011. In the Gracie County storage, the empty drawer left a rectangular dust outline where the old file had lain quietly for nearly 40 years. 3 days after the file was officially reopened, technician Naomi Pike began the process of re-examining all original evidence. In the Michigan State Cold Case Investigation Team's lab, she laid out each file envelope on the stainless steel table, arranging by digitization order. Each sample was opened in a sterile cabinet, wearing gloves, using separate tools. Years working with old evidence had taught her that one small mistake could erase all chances of data recovery. First, Pike rescanned all 5 Polaroid scene photos. Using a high-resolution scanner with color restoration software, she captured each, increasing brightness to clarify background details. When images appeared on screen, Sarah's Ford Pinto details emerged much clearer than the old prints. The third photo especially drew attention. Reflection on the driver's windshield had a blurry area shaped like a person. Pike zoomed in, adjusted light balance, removed noise. The figure stood on the left edge, shoulders slightly tilted, head wearing something round and dark, possibly a fedora. She noted in her book, "Reflection, possible male figure near driver's side." For certainty, Pike sent the image file to the Lansing State Digital Analysis Department, requesting spectral light scan to determine contrast. Initial results showed the reflection was not optical noise. Light bounced off a fabric-structured surface, indicating likely a real person near the car when the photo was taken. Pike returned to the table, opening the second evidence bag containing hair samples and materials from car seat. Inside the envelope was a small nylon bag with 3 long dark brown hairs, identified as Sarah's. But at the bottom was a shorter black hair, clipped between 2 wax paper layers. She used tweezers to remove it, examining under microscope, thicker hair, slightly curly shaft, no clear follicle, but root still had tissue specks. The 1973 file had no record of this sample. Pike cross-checked Hardin's original report. He only noted 3 long brown hairs with follicles, meaning this black hair might have been overlooked during collection. Excitement crept into each movement. For 40 years, no one had touched this evidence. Pike changed gloves, placed the hair on a slide, took micrograph, and measured length. Then she put it in a microfilter tube, labeling M4, unknown male hair, possible mixed source, then sealed for Lansing Forensic Lab. Attached was a detailed statement, stating, sample never previously tested, potential for nuclear DNA. Collected in original evidence bag of case 73-41, source victim's car seat. That afternoon, while waiting for transfer, Pike re-examined the scanned photos closely. In the third, with the reflection shadow, she discovered another detail. Snow near the left wheel was dented deeper than the rest, as if someone stood there briefly. She compared to Hardin's scene report. No clear shoe prints, thick snow, surface erased by wind, meaning this dent was obscured in 1973. Natural light, only revealed now by digital scanning. Pike printed the photo, circling in red the shadow figure and snow dent, pinning to the analysis board. Beside it, she pinned Hardin's sketch of the fedora man from the grocery witness statement. The 2 images, though blurry and disjointed, shared one common point, the hat. She stared for a long time, then added a small note. Possible correlation between reflection plus witness description. Need verification. By late afternoon, the Lansing lab sent a specialized vehicle to pick up the hair sample. Pike handed it over directly, signing the transfer protocol under strict procedures. When the final sealed box was placed in the cold storage container, she felt a mix of excitement and tension. No one knew if the DNA in that hair strand was still intact after nearly 40 years, but for her, it was the only chance to break the silence surrounding the Sarah Cantrell case. Before leaving the room, Pike reorganized the file, placing copies of the processed photos on top, then attached a note. Awaiting DNA results, expected in 14 days. She turned off the lights, glancing one last time through the large window. Outside, Lansing was immersed in late spring sleet, streetlights casting pale halos like the faint reflection in the old Polaroid photo. Pike left the lab with a strange feeling, as if the past was drawing closer, just beyond a pane of glass and a few days of waiting. On the ground floor, the on-duty evidence clerk asked her, "A missing person case?" Pike just nodded, smiling faintly. "An old one, very old, but it might not be over yet." As the elevator doors closed, the metallic clang echoed dryly, leaving the quiet room where the photo of the snow-covered Ford Pinto still lay on the table, with the blurry figure standing beside it, like waiting to be seen again after nearly half a century of being forgotten. 14 days after the hair sample was sent to the Lansing lab, Naomi Pike received the results notification. The sealed envelope was delivered internally, labeled confidential, priority. She opened it in the private testing room, where only the steady hum of the exhaust fan could be heard. On the printed report, the first line read clearly, "Sample M4 contains nuclear DNA, male gender completely different from victim Sarah Cantrell. Michigan State Database comparison results, 98.7% match with DNA profile of Colin P. Dudley, born 1944. Currently residing in Grand Rapids." Pike sat silently for a few seconds, rereading each line. The name was familiar, appearing multiple times in Inspector Hardin's old file, the ex-boyfriend, once suspected but without enough evidence to charge. Now, after nearly 40 years, a single hair had closed the circle of suspicion, Hardin once noted in his logbook. She printed extra copies of the results, signed the recipient confirmation section, and sent the original to the command office. By noon, the case file was officially updated in the system. Status: reopened. Active investigation. The new text appeared on the screen, replacing the cold case inactive label that had been attached to Sarah Cantrell's name for decades. Pike took a deep breath, then reopened the entire 1973 original file to review the investigation process. In the following days, she read every page of documents, reorganized timelines, clearly noting each witness, location, and piece of evidence. Starting from the morning Sarah left home, the shoe prints leading to the lake, the abandoned Ford Pinto, then the statement from the person who saw her with a man in a black fedora. Every detail, no matter how small, now carried different meaning. That man could be Dudley. Pike retrieved the old suspect sketch. Though the drawing was faded, the square jaw, high nose bridge, and dark hat matched remarkably with Dudley's identification photo in the 1973 administrative file. Pike opened Colin Dudley's personal file in the state database. He was now 67 years old, living on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, never convicted, worked for many years in the mechanical industry, retired in 2008. In the DNA information section, the test results were stored from a minor traffic accident in 2006, when a sample was taken for identification comparison. Thanks to that coincidence, the hair in the Cantrell case was automatically confirmed by the system. She noted, match confirmed through CODIS, source 2006 traffic case. That same day, Pike sent the report to the cold case investigation team leader and requested permission to reopen a state-level investigation. The order was approved that afternoon, with instructions to review Dudley's entire itinerary and connections to the victim. She was assigned to handle forensics and reconstruct the 1973 event sequence. That evening, in the small technical department room, Pike reloaded all the digitally scanned Polaroid photos. In the one with the reflection shadow, she zoomed in 200%, then placed it next to an old portrait of Dudley from the Ford factory file. The hat, shoulder posture, even the chin shadow, though blurry, still showed similarities. She did not record this as direct evidence, but added a note: visual similarity requires independent verification. After completing the notes, Pike called Bill Hardin, the original investigator. His voice was still slow as in their first conversation. She reported briefly, "We have the DNA results. The sample matches Colin Dudley." On the other end, silence stretched. Finally, Hardin replied, "I knew that day would come, just didn't think it would take 40 years. He thanked her, then advised, "Do everything thoroughly. Don't let this case slip away like last time." Pike promised to send him a summary of the results once procedures were complete. The next day she went to the Gracie County storage, where the original file had lain dormant for 4 decades. In the pale white light of the hallway, Pike carefully opened the metal drawer, pulling out the cover marked 7341. Inside was still Hardin's final report, with his 1974 handwritten line. No evidence she ever left the Lake Gracie area. She attached a new label below, "Reopened, 2011." Beneath the label, she wrote in neat small letters, "DNA sample matches primary suspect." That afternoon, in the internal meeting, Pike presented the test results and proposed the re-investigation roadmap. The cold case team members examined the documents closely, many surprised that old evidence could still yield such clear results. The team leader concluded, "This is one of the rare successes of the program. We'll start over from scratch." The official order was issued immediately after. Sarah Cantrell's disappearance, once considered unsolvable, was now an active reopened file after 38 years. Leaving the meeting room, Pike stopped at the team's information board, where photos of old cases were pinned. She took the Polaroid of the Ford Pinto, attaching it to a separate frame with the new title, Millbrook, Gracie Lake Case. Below the photo, she placed the reprinted DNA results, underlining 98.7% match, Colin P. Dudley. Standing and looking for a moment, Pike clearly felt the weight of time, of a story not yet closed. In the quiet room, only the fan hum and light reflecting on the old photo, where the faint man's shadow beside the car still stood, motionless, like a memory just awakened after nearly half a century. Immediately after the DNA results confirmed the link between Colin Dudley and the evidence in Sarah Cantrell's car, Naomi Pike began reviewing the entire old scene map. In the 1973 file, Inspector Bill Hardin's notes marked a location near the edge of Lake Gracie, abandoned Ford factory, suspicious male shoe prints present, but no direct evidence found. That phrase caught Pike's attention. The Ford factory by the lake had been demolished in the late 1980s, leaving only bare concrete foundation, the rest overgrown with trees. But if those old shoe prints belonged to the same person who left the hair in the car, then whatever remained under the old foundation might hold the answer. Pike drafted a report requesting scene excavation, citing the DNA results as legal basis and referencing the Michigan state law clause allowing re-examination of old scenes with new evidence. The order was approved by the state prosecutor's office after 4 days, assigned to the Gracie County forensic team for coordination. On the morning of April 22, 2011, the cold case team's specialized vehicle stopped at the overgrown lot by the lake. Once the Ford parts assembly plant, the rusted warning sign still stood, property of Ford Motor Company faded under dust. When workers removed the first concrete slab, the smell of damp earth mixed with old oil rose. Beneath the roughly 10 centimeters thick concrete, technicians discovered an unusually dark soil patch. Pike ordered expansion of the area by 2 square meters, using magnetic field sweep tools to check for anomalies. The sensor vibrated lightly, metal signal at about 30 centimeters depth. Digging down, the forensic team found a coiled old electrical wire, ends rough as if burned, beside it a rotted wool blanket fragment, interspersed with faded red fabric threads. Nearby was a half-broken metal button-like object. Pike carefully used tweezers to collect each sample, placing them in separate evidence bags, numbering by discovery order. When the blanket piece was lifted, the soil beneath revealed a long dark streak adhering to the old cement base. A technician shone ultraviolet light. The streak glowed with a characteristic reaction of blood. Pike immediately sealed the soil area, sending samples to the on-site mobile lab. Preliminary Kastle-Meyer reagent test gave a positive reaction for human blood traces. She requested control samples, cold storage, and on-site documentation. Throughout the afternoon, the surrounding area was cordoned with yellow tape, police vehicles blocking the old factory entrance. Pike and the forensic team continued digging in a wider radius, finding more charred wood scraps, a hairpin, and wool fibers still sticky with dried resin. She recognized the red on the fabric, closely matched the tone of the sweater Sarah wore in the last photo taken before her disappearance, stored in the 1973 original file. By evening, all samples were sealed and transferred to the Lansing Center. Pike personally accompanied the vehicle to supervise transport. In her mind, the image of objects buried under concrete, electrical wire, blanket piece, blood streak, formed a terrifying picture. This place might have been the real crime scene. 2 weeks later, the Lansing lab sent detailed analysis results. The 12-page report left the entire team silent for minutes at the conclusion. Sample #7 contains DNA fully matching the genetic profile of Sarah L. Cantrell, born 1950. Statistical error rate was 1 in 6.8 billion, virtually certain. Additionally, the blanket and red fabric threads had mixed DNA, mostly the victim's and a faint male genetic marker compatible with Colin P. Dudley, but insufficient quantity for independent conclusion. Pike printed the results, pinned them to the reinvestigation file, writing a summary. Biological evidence recovered under old Ford factory foundation confirms victim Sarah Cantrell's blood. High probability, the scene involved violent act. On May 12, 2011, the cold case team's emergency meeting minutes recorded, homicide suspicion established, transfer file to Michigan State Criminal Investigation level. Immediately after, The case status in the system changed to homicide suspicion, active investigation. Pike sat before the screen, watching the new text appear. Nearly 40 years, the fragments buried under concrete had finally spoken. In the report to the prosecutor's office, she emphasized DNA results from secondary scene reinforce hypothesis that victim never left Lake Gracie area, consistent with original investigator Hardin's 1973 assessment. That afternoon, she called Hardin, reporting briefly, "We found blood samples under the old factory foundation. Results match Sarah's DNA." On the line, his aged but clear voice, "I knew she was still there. Back then we smelled metal in the wind but couldn't prove it. Thank you for going back." Pike was silent. When the call ended, she stepped onto the porch, looking westward. Sunset fell on the lake surface, reflecting on the old concrete blocks the forensic team had lifted that morning. Beneath them, the dark soil hadn't dried yet, like the trace of a secret finally peeled from 4 decades of silence. In her notebook, Pike wrote the final line for that day: primary scene. Old Ford factory, victim blood trace established. Initial proof of intentional violence. Below the line, she drew 2 red underlines. Her personal mark used only when a case entered a new chapter, from missing to murder. Immediately after the DNA results confirmed Sarah Cantrell's blood traces under the old Ford factory foundation, the Michigan State investigation team shifted from missing person to homicide investigation. Naomi Pike, along with Leadfield Inspector Raymond Keller, completed the forensic report and proposed summoning Colin Dudley for additional statements. The summons was sent on May 18, 2011. Dudley was then living on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, in a 2-story wooden house on the forest edge, more than 20 miles from downtown. The next morning, 2 cold case team officers, Lieutenant Chris Belden and Special Agent Pike, arrived at his door. They stated the purpose: assist in verifying information from the 1973 file. Dudley appeared calm, but his hand gripped the doorknob too long before inviting them in. The house was tidy. Ground floor flooded with light, a stack of auto-technical books on the table, old certificates on the wall, and a black fedora hanging right by the entrance. Pike glanced at it, mentally noting. The interview took place in the living room. Dudley leaned back in the leather chair, hands clasped over his chest. When Lieutenant Belden began reciting timelines from the file, morning of February 25, 1973, Sarah Cantrell left home at 9 a.m., appeared at Millbrook Grocery at 9:30 a.m., and vanished after. He just nodded. No reaction. When Belden asked, "Do you remember meeting her again around that time?" Dudley slightly frowned. "I told the police 40 years ago. No. I didn't see her after we broke up." Pike gently presented a reprinted photo from the original file. The Ford Pinto abandoned by Lake Gracie, then flipped to the enlarged image she restored from the old Polaroid, showing the faint reflection on the car window. "We discovered new details in the original photo," she said slowly. "Possibly a man's shadow. Can you explain why this reflection shows a fedora, identical to the one hanging there?" Dudley glanced at the photo, his smile stiffening. "I don't know. Could be someone else. Ford workers used to be there. Many people around," Belden continued, voice sharper. "Do you know the old Ford factory foundation by the lake was just excavated? We found human blood traces, matching Sarah's DNA." The words thickened the air. Dudley leaned forward slightly, fingers tapping the armrest, a small but telling sign of tension. Pike recognized. "I have nothing to say," he replied, after a few seconds of silence. "I worked there when the factory was running. If you found something, I don't know." Pike opened the file, pulling out the hair test results. "We also have your DNA in her car. Care to explain?" Dudley quickly glanced toward the window, eyes blinking. "Maybe she visited me," he said, voice lowering. "I don't remember clearly. It's old. She was very sensitive. I don't want to dig it up." Pike noted every word. She observed that whenever Sarah's name was mentioned, Dudley avoided eye contact, his hands trembling slightly. Though no confession, the changes in tone and behavior were enough to classify as psychological instability signs. The session lasted over 2 hours. At the end, Dudley signed the minutes but refused house search permission. "I've said enough. I have nothing left to hide," he said, standing to escort them out. Outside, forest wind blew strongly, ruffling his silver-issued hair. Pike glanced back one last time. The black fedora still hung neatly, just like the faint reflection in the old photo. On the drive back to Lansing, she and Belden agreed they needed a search warrant for his house and vehicle. "With the blood, DNA, and that psychological reaction, we have grounds," Belden said. Pike nodded. "If anything remains after all these years, it'll be in that house." On May 21st, the interview report was sent to command. In the summary, Pike wrote clearly, "Suspect Colin P. Dudley appeared flustered by DNA evidence, evaded questions about relationship with victim, behavior, tension when asked about Ford factory. Recommend requesting search warrant for residence and personal vehicle." That same day, the state prosecutor's office approved the request. Under Michigan compiled laws, Section 780.651, the house search warrant was issued to search for evidence related to homicide occurring before 1974 in Gracie County area. The warrant was valid for 72 hours. Pike received the original at 6 p.m. She placed it in the file cover, stamping red homicide investigation, active. In her work log, she wrote briefly, "Interview completed. Primary suspect Colin Dudley. Preparing to execute search warrant." That night, leaving the office, Pike paused by the window, looking out at the parking lot where yellow lights spread over the wet pavement. In her mind replayed the image of the silver-haired man sitting still in the wooden house, trembling hand on the armrest, eyes evading when Sarah's name was spoken. 40 years of silence seemed about to end, and with it, another truth preparing to surface from the cold lake in Millbrook. Early on the morning of May 23, 2011, the Michigan Department of Justice Task Force arrived in Grand Rapids to execute the search warrant on Colin P. Dudley's residence. His two-story wooden house was located on the northern edge of the city, bordering a small forest sloping down to the Grand River Valley. The sky was lightly foggy, mist thick on the porch roof, the first morning sunlight peeking through the birch trees. At 7:15 a.m., the three-person investigation team, Lieutenant Chris Belden, Technician Naomi Pike, and Legal Officer Thomas Vega, knocked on the door. Dudley opened it, wearing an old sweater, his face pale. When Belden read the warrant, he remained silent, stepping back slightly to let them pass. The house was clean, meticulously arranged but cold, with dry air carrying a faint machine oil smell. Pike quickly set up cameras to record the entire process, per scene search protocol. They divided to check each room, starting from the ground floor. In the living room, the black fedora hanging by the entrance was seized first. The item that had appeared in the faint reflection on Sarah's car window. Pike, using specialized gloves, placed the hat in an evidence bag, labeling it E1. On the table beside the armchair, she discovered a brown leather notebook, old, untitled. Opening it, the first pages were filled with handwritten notes. Technical notes. Ford Assembly Plant, Millbrook, 1973. Later pages, interspersed with work descriptions, had separate lines. Morning 2/25, met S to talk at old factory, no one else. Below that, scrawled, need to end it, no other way. Pike glanced at Belden. He nodded, immediately sealing the notebook. In the attic, in an old carton labeled Documents 1970, 1975. Vega found an envelope containing 4 Polaroid photos. 3 showed Sarah Cantrell at an amateur theater performance in Millbrook. The 4th was her standing beside the white Ford Pinto, smiling. Each had a small note on the back in male handwriting. S. Feb. 73. Next to the envelope was a short-cut electrical wire, coiled with old cloth tape, ends charred. This item was sealed separately, coded E4. Pike continued to the basement. It was damp and dark, heavy with metal smell. Part of the ceiling had an old vent pipe, leading to the back porch. On the wooden table were many mechanical tools, pliers, saws, thin knives, a roll of brown oilcloth, and a parts box labeled Dearborn Plant. On the floor, she discovered a circular dark stain, about 20 centimeters in diameter, apparently scrubbed. Pike used a swab to sample it. Testing with Castlemeyer, weak positive for blood traces. She immediately sealed the sample area, photographing the entire basement and nearby objects. While the forensic team collected evidence, Dudley sat quietly in the chair, hands clasped over his chest, eyes blankly staring at the yard. When asked about the notebook, he said briefly, "Old work memories, about Sarah's photos," he said, kept for friendship. Pike noted the contradiction between words and demeanor, voice trembling, sweat on his temples, despite the temperature just over 60 degrees F. The search lasted over 3 hours. In total, the investigation team seized 1. Black Fedora 2. 1973 Diary 3. 4 Polaroid photos of the victim. 4. Charred end electrical wire. 5. Blood sample from basement floor 6. Oilcloth roll and mechanical tools. All evidence was immediately transported to the Lansing lab under Pike's direct supervision. There, she compared fabric fibers from the fedora brim with the sample recovered under the Ford factory foundation. Microscopic spectroscopy and synthetic fiber analysis showed both samples were the same poly-wool type, dyed with original aniline black. Limited production fibers from 1972, 1974, mainly used for Stetson men's hats. Fiber structure analysis confirmed 2 samples match material type, same manufacturing source, high probability, same object. Simultaneously, the forensic lab reported preliminarily on the electrical wire segment. Copper composition and insulation matched wiring used in the Ford Millbrook plant's interior electrical system, discontinued mid-1970s. Remaining wire casing had red paint traces similar to the casing sample from the excavation. This evidence strongly reinforced the hypothesis that Colin Dudley was present at the factory site during the victim's disappearance. Pike compiled all results and submitted a 27-page report to the state prosecutor's office. In the conclusion, she wrote, "Chain of evidence, including DNA, blood traces, fiber samples, photos, diary and metal materials, forms a tight link between suspect Colin P. Dudley and the old Ford factory crime scene. Factors consistent with assumption of intentional homicide occurring on or after the morning of February 25, 1973. On May 27, 2011, the cold case team's internal meeting minutes recorded sufficient basis for preliminary criminal charges. Recommend coordination with Michigan State Prosecutor's Office to prepare prosecution file. The case status in the system changed again, from homicide suspicion to active case, prosecution pending. That evening, after completing the final part of the report, Pike stood from her desk, looking at the photo of Sarah Cantrell she had pinned beside the file. A youthful smile, bright eyes under the snow. Below the photo was the evidence appraisal report, where the bold line fibers from suspect's hat match scene sample stood out like a cut into 4 decades of silence. In Grand Rapids, Colin Dudley's wooden house was sealed. Local police hung a sign, "Property seized, Michigan State Police." Inside, the chair he once sat in still bore the heavy marks of time, and the fedora, the object tied to the faint figure in the 1973 Polaroid, now lay in a cold sealed bag, becoming the most critical evidence in the file about to be transferred to state prosecution. On the morning of May 30, 2011, the official arrest warrant for Colin P. Dudley was signed and executed. At 7:20 a.m., the Michigan State Task Force with Grand Rapids Police approached the wooden house where he lived. As the patrol car stopped at the gate, Dudley was standing on the porch, holding a coffee cup. He looked up, showing no surprise, just setting the cup on the wooden table and saying softly, "I knew it." Belden read the arrest warrant, the cold handcuffs closing around the wrists of the man who had been silent for 40 years. Dudley was taken to the Gracie County Police Headquarters for interrogation. In the interview room, White light shone obliquely, reflecting off the steel table. Naomi Pike was present with Lieutenant Belden and the court-appointed defense attorney. The interrogation began at 9:05 a.m. Initially, Dudley remained silent, eyes distant, but when Belden placed the thick file in front of him, including Polaroids, DNA samples, and evidence results, his composure began to crack. Belden opened, "You said you never saw Sarah Cantrell again after breaking up, but DNA evidence in her car and blood found under the Ford factory foundation show otherwise." Dudley was silent for minutes, then sighed softly, hands clenching. "She didn't deserve to die," he said, voice hoarse. Pike noted, then gently asked, "What do you want to say about that morning?" After a few seconds of hesitation, Dudley began to speak. He said that on the morning of February 25, 1973, Sarah came to his house in Millbrook. She brought a paper bag and said she needed to talk privately. She said she was pregnant, and the baby was mine, he repeated. "I panicked. I wasn't ready to marry anyone, not ready to be a father. I told her to wait, but she wanted me to take responsibility. I got angry. She did too. She said she'd tell my mother, the factory, everyone." According to the statement, the argument lasted nearly an hour. Sarah left the house, saying she would walk to the abandoned Ford factory by the lake, where they had met a few times before, to leave something just for the two of us. Dudley followed in his small work truck. He said he only intended to say a few more words to calm her, but there, things spiraled out of control. She pushed me. I grabbed her arm. We struggled. She fell. Her head hit an iron bar. I bent down, called her name over and over, but she didn't wake up. Belden asked, "Did you call for help?" "No," Dudley replied, eyes empty. "I was scared. I couldn't think straight. I just knew I had to make it all disappear." He said that evening he returned to the factory, bringing electrical wire, a blanket, and a bag of cement. He wrapped Sarah's body in the blanket, placed it in a corner of the shop, poured concrete over it. "I thought no one would find it," he said. "Then I burned what was left, wire, some fabric, even her sweater, and spread lime powder to kill the smell." Dudley paused, trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop threatening me." Pike asked, "Why keep the photos and diary?" "I don't know," he replied. "Maybe to remember, or to remind myself I did something that couldn't be fixed." The interrogation lasted until noon. Dudley signed the statement minutes, confirming it was voluntary. At the end, he added a handwritten line. "I take responsibility for what happened at the Ford factory area. No one else was involved." Immediately after the session, the Michigan State Prosecutor's Office issued an official statement. Colin P. Dudley, arrested on second-degree murder charges related to the disappearance of Sarah Cantrell. At Lansing headquarters, Naomi Pike finalized the evidence file with a copy of the statement for transfer to the prosecutor's office. That afternoon, leaving the interview room, Dudley glanced at the narrow window where spring sunlight shone on the wall, just like the light strip on the snow years ago. He said softly to Belden, "I thought the snow would bury everything." Belden replied, voice low, "No snow can bury the truth." As the vehicle carrying the suspect left the station, Naomi Pike stood watching, feeling both heavy and relieved. The Sarah Cantrell case, one of Michigan's coldest files, finally had its resolution. But in her mind, the image of the young woman leaving home on a winter morning in 1973 remained vivid, as if time had only paused to wait for this day. Immediately after Colin Dudley was arrested and confessed to burying Sarah Cantrell's body under the abandoned Ford factory foundation, an emergency supplemental excavation warrant was issued. On June 2, 2011, the Michigan State Forensic Team, along with geology experts, arrived at the old site by Lake Gracie, equipped with core drills, ground-penetrating scanners, and specialized sample preservation vehicles. The factory area had been almost completely demolished since the 1980s, leaving only cracked concrete foundation covered in moss. The excavation permit was publicly posted, and temporary fencing was erected around a perimeter exceeding 1 hectare. At 8 a.m., lead technician Raymond Keller remarked the original locations, where Sarah's blood samples were found in the first excavation. This time, they expanded the area 4 meters southwest, exactly the spot Dudley described in his confession minutes. Beneath the approximately 12 centimeters thick concrete, the magnetic scanner showed anomalies, low conductivity, and high magnetic resistance. Characteristic of soil containing solid objects mixed with bone or metal. Keller ordered the entire floor section cut with a diamond saw, creating a 2x2 meter square. When the concrete slab was lifted, a musty smell mixing rust and decayed earth wafted out. Pike, present at the scene, stepped forward to document and supervise sample collection. Under floodlights, dark, loose soil appeared. Just a few shovel strokes in, a forensic technician spotted a faintly gleaming object in the mud, a small silver ring, smooth, slightly bent at the edge. Next came a hand bone fragment, about 10 centimeters long, still caked with dry dirt. No one spoke, the team just bent lower, working slower and more meticulously. 2 hours later, after clearing soil deeper than 60 centimeters, the full human skeletal structure gradually emerged. The skull was partially fractured on the right temple, matching Dudley's statement about the fall against an iron bar. Beneath the ribs were nearly rotted red fabric scraps, interspersed with dark wool fibers. On the left wrist, still hung a silver snowflake bracelet, the item that, per the 1973 file, Sarah's mother had reported as the last birthday gift to my daughter. Pike stood silent for a long while. The scene was no longer cold forensic data, but a quiet note closing 40 years of waiting. She directed full-area photography, numbering each bone section, then ordered transport to the Lansing Identification Lab in cold storage containers. The bracelet and silver ring were sealed separately, coded E9 and E10. 3 weeks later, DNA identification results were sent back. Marrow samples from the femur bone matched completely with Sarah Cantrell's stored genetic profile from the prior hair analysis. The report concluded clearly, bone parts and samples recovered at Ford Millbrook plant location belonged to the same individual. Sarah L. Cantrell, born 1950. Accuracy was determined at 99.99%. Additionally, the forensic pathologist found 2 parallel cracks on the skull, uneven width, likely caused by a rigid bar-like object, matching morphological results of blunt force trauma. Preliminary conclusion: cause of death, cranial trauma from hard object. Death occurred around February 1973. On June 24, 2011, at the Michigan State Prosecutor's Office, a 62-page comprehensive report was submitted, including all DNA results, scene photos, and excavation maps. The top title read clearly, "Reclassification, Homicide, Confirmed." From that moment, Sarah Cantrell's disappearance was officially reclassified as murder. That afternoon, Naomi Pike and the investigation team returned to the Lake Gracie area to complete site closure procedures. Summer wind blew across the water, carrying the smell of young moss and the metallic echo of half-cut concrete slabs. Pike stood gazing at the lake, which had swallowed all traces for 4 decades. In her personal log, she wrote, "Victim identified. All suspicions confirmed. Millbrook, June 2011. The case is no longer missing." At Lansing headquarters, when the report was entered into the system, the file status changed for the final time in the investigation phase. Cold case #7341. Resolved, homicide confirmed, suspect in custody. The screen displayed simple text, but behind it lay nearly 40 years of silence, errors, and waiting. Pike turned off the lights, leaving the office just past 7 p.m. In the moment the door closed, the computer's blue glow still reflected on the old Polaroid photo on the desk. The snow-covered Ford Pinto, and the faint figure by the door, now with a name, a charge, and a final ending for the woman who vanished in Michigan's winter of 1973. In July 2011, nearly 2 months after the excavation results were announced, Naomi Pike entered the final phase of the investigation, completing the entire Sarah L. Cantrell case file for transfer to the Michigan State Prosecutor's Office. The cold case team's file room in Lansing was filled with yellow light and the steady hum of fans. On the table, She arranged dozens of thick document stacks, categorized by group, forensic evidence, statements, scene photos, maps, diary, and scientific conclusions. Each stack was plastic-wrapped, labeled, and numbered per regulation. The official file consisted of 7 parts. 1. Biological evidence: hair, blood, bone samples, and DNA matches between victim and suspect Colin P. Dudley. 2. Physical evidence: black fedora, electrical wire, blanket, silver bracelet, ring, and 1973 notebook. 3. Image data: original Polaroids, digital scans, excavation site maps, and suspect reflection images. 4. Statements: Colin Dudley's confession, neighbor witness testimony, 1973 and 2011 interrogation minutes. 5. Expert reports: DNA analysis, fabric fiber analysis, forensic pathology results. 6. Investigation timeline: from disappearance date to homicide confirmation. 7. Administrative documents: search warrants, arrest minutes, transfer memos, and signatures from involved units. Pike meticulously cross-checked each item. In the introduction, she wrote a 2-page overview outlining the reinvestigation process, from discovering intact evidence in storage to DNA identification and body recovery excavation. She emphasized modern forensic technology's decisive role. Without next-generation nuclear DNA analysis and high-resolution digital imaging, 1973 evidence would yield no investigative value. In the main report, Pike also acknowledged original investigator Inspector Bill Hardin's sample preservation. Thanks to standard compliant storage in dry, cold, original sealed conditions, hair and Polaroid samples retained integrity after 38 years. She added a note. This file exemplifies the value of diligence. Sometimes justice arrives late, but it arrives. Each section was cross-verified, every DNA result paired with original evidence, every statement checked against specific times and locations. Pike used red pen to mark key case milestones. February 25, 1973. Sarah's disappearance, May 30, 2011. Colin Dudley's confession, June 2, 2011. Excavation recovering remains. The 3 dates were bolded in the final summary, like anchors for the entire story. By the weekend, Pike printed the official version over 400 pages, stamping Final Investigation Report, Michigan State Police Cold Case Division. Before submission, she wanted confirmation signature from the man who started the journey, Inspector Bill Hardin. On July 15, she drove to Hardin's Lansing suburb home, where he lived with his wife in a small house overlooking meadows. Over 70, his voice was still clear, eyes bright behind thick glasses. When Pike placed the file on the table, he opened the first page, reading slowly. On the notes page was his old line, "No evidence she ever left the Lake Gracie area." He smiled faintly. "I wrote that on a heavy snow day. Didn't think anyone would read it again after 40 years. Pike nodded, sliding the final confirmation sheet toward him. "I want you to sign, not just procedurally. This is yours." Hardin took the pen, signing neatly. William J. Hardin, retired investigator, MSP. Below, he added by hand, "File complete." After signing, he looked up. "You know, back then, I always believed this case wasn't over. Just not time yet." "Thank you for doing what my generation couldn't," Pike replied softly. "Without your file, we'd have had nothing to start with." On the drive back to Lansing, summer wind blew through cornfields turning color. The file lay on the passenger seat, thick and heavy, cover corner reading, Case File 73-41. Sarah L. Cantrell, closed pending trial. As the car passed the Millbrook, Gracie County line sign, Pike glanced at the distant shimmering lake. Once the epicenter of 40 years of silence. That evening, she submitted the file to the Michigan State Central Archive, signing under Investigation Complete. The final line in the conclusion read, "Technology may change, people may change, but evidence never lies." The Sarah Cantrell case closes with truth proven by science and the persistence of those who refuse to forget. And at the bottom corner of the report, beside Pike's signature, was another handwritten line, smaller, scrawled but clear. W.J. Hardin, file complete. 40 years later, that statement had finally become truth. Colin P. Dudley's trial took place in September 2011 at the Gracie County Court, Michigan. More than 4 months after his arrest, the Sarah L. Cantrell case file was officially made public. Courtroom 3, in the early 20th century limestone building, was packed with reporters, Millbrook residents, and law students auditing. For most locals, the name Cantrell had sunk into old memory, now suddenly resurfacing, like a cut reopening a past thought sealed. Before the trial began, prosecutor James R. Leland announced the formal indictment. Defendant Colin Patrick Dudley is charged with first-degree manslaughter, including elements of concealing the crime and disposing of victim Sarah L. Cantrell's body, occurring at the Ford factory by Lake Gracie on February 25, 1973. Beyond the main charge, the indictment mentioned obstructing criminal investigation due to body concealment and concrete pouring. Colin Dudley, 67, appeared in gray prison garb, silver hair, gaunt face, but still cold-featured. He was represented by court-appointed attorney Mark Winters. When Judge Helen Murray asked about plea, he replied briefly, "I take full responsibility. I didn't intend to kill her, but I did." His hoarse words silenced the room. In presentation, prosecutor Leland reconstructed the entire case from the 1973 winter morning when Sarah Cantrell left home and vanished, to the Ford Pinto discovery, the file forgotten nearly 40 years in storage, until the 2011 cold case team uncovered DNA. He emphasized, just one hair, one blood trace, and the persistence of people who don't forget justice closed this case. But behind it is a life, a 23-year-old woman who didn't live out her days. Defense did not contest forensic evidence, as Dudley had signed confession during investigation. Attorney Winters only requested consideration of mitigating factors, age, health, and defendant's cooperation, and candid confession. He said, "My client lived nearly half his life in silence and guilt. His voluntary confession, though late, is the final act to return the truth." Naomi Pike's evidence presentation was the trial's highlight. Appearing as expert witness, she explained in detail how next-generation DNA technology enabled recovery of decades-old, stored evidence. In court, she projected original Polaroids, black Fedora fiber analysis results, and maps of blood sample locations under the Ford factory foundation. Every detail, every figure was consistent. When Leland asked, "Do you believe there is any doubt about who is responsible for Sarah Cantrell's death?" Pike replied firmly, "Scientifically, no doubt remains." In closing, prosecution stressed the cruelty of concealment. Colin Dudley not only took a young woman's life, but tried to bury the truth under concrete, letting time do the rest. He wanted snow, earth, and silence to erase traces. But justice has no statute. When allowed final statement, Dudley only said, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope people stop mentioning my name beside hers." He bowed his head, looking at no one. After 3 hours deliberation, Judge Murray read the verdict. Her voice low, clear. "Considering case circumstances, the court finds defendant Colin Patrick Dudley guilty of first-degree manslaughter, sentenced to 30 years imprisonment without parole for the first 20 years. Sentence effective immediately." In the courtroom, pen scratches on paper sounded soft but echoed in the thick air. Michigan media reported almost instantly. The Detroit Free Press, Lansing State Journal, and Grand Rapids Herald all ran the same headline. Cold Case 1973, solved after 38 years, justice for Sarah Cantrell. Local TV replayed footage of police vehicles taking Dudley from court, along with old Polaroids shown in evidence slides. The UMIC legal commentator said, "This proves no case is too old when evidence is preserved and people remain patient in seeking answers." At Lansing, The cold case team was honored in a brief press conference. Naomi Pike was named for leading breakthrough forensic testing. When reporters asked her thoughts, she only said, "None of us seek fame. We just want to return a name to someone forgotten." That afternoon, the verdict was sent to the Michigan Department of Justice for archiving with the original file. The final system update read, Case 73, Bullet E1, Sarah L. Cantrell. Homicide solved, 2011. The case door closed, not with gunfire or pursuit, but with a dry, cold judgment sheet, ending 38 years of silence from that Michigan winter. In December 2011, nearly 3 months after Colin P. Dudley's sentence took effect, forensic technician Naomi Pike was assigned the final task related to the Sarah Cantrell case, writing a professional summary report for the Michigan Cold Case Program. This report was not only for internal archiving, but also for training new investigators statewide. She sat back in the cold case team office in Lansing, beside the nearly 400-page file and resealed evidence, the fedora, brown leather notebook, and copies of DNA results. On the report cover, she wrote the title, Case Study, The Sarah L. Cantrell Investigation. The introduction summarized briefly. The Sarah Cantrell case is one of the longest unsolved disappearances resolved using modern forensic methods based on evidence preserved for nearly 4 decades. Success did not lie in luck, but in the continuity of storage, comparison, and patient analysis. Pike detailed 3 main professional lesson groups, seen as the foundation for all future cold case investigations. 1. Long-term evidence preservation, the value of endurance. Pike described finding the envelope with hair and Polaroids, still bearing original seals in the Gracie County Archive. The existence of these samples was not random, she wrote, but due to strict 1973 storage protocols, a time when DNA technology did not exist. She quoted directly from Inspector Bill Hardin's original minutes, who labeled each sample per state standards and signed in blue ink. Pike emphasized, if any evidence had been lost, the case would never reopen. This section was marked as the golden rule of long-term investigation: no sample is meaningless, only technology not yet able to hear its voice. 2. Re-examining scene photos with digital technology. Pike devoted pages to the old Polaroid scanning process and discovering the fedora-wearing reflection, key to reopening the case. She outlined the technical process: 6,400 dpi scanning, color spectrum rebalancing, dark area contrast enhancement with specialized software. This allowed identifying the faint outline of a man beside the Ford Pinto, a detail completely overlooked in the 1973 report. Technology does not replace people, she wrote, but it offers a second chance for past human errors. The report recommended local police digitize all old scene materials and store in recoverable formats. This later became official in the Michigan Cold Case Imaging Protocol 2012. 3. Cross-generational collaboration, bridging intuition and science. The final report section focused on the human element. Pike recounted contacting Inspector Bill Hardin, the 1973 investigator, and his help to the new team. Hardin's intuition, the note and no evidence she ever left the Lake Gracie areas, was the compass for the entire re-investigation. Science only proved what experience had sensed. Pike proposed inviting retired investigators to consult on cold cases, not just for information, but to preserve professional memory, data no document can hold. After the 3 content groups, Pike summarized 7 appendix pages on long-term sample management, degraded nuclear DNA comparison methods, and Polaroid recovery guidelines. In the conclusion, she wrote, "Justice does not depend on time but on evidence memory." The Cantrell case proves that when science and human memory meet, truth finds its way. On December 20, 2011, the report was completed and submitted to the State Justice Director. A month later, it was circulated system-wide as Cold Case Reference Report #1109 and selected as a model file for the next year's forensic investigation training course. At the release meeting, the director stated, "The Cantrell case has set a new standard for cold case investigation in Michigan. Every evidence preserved today may be tomorrow's key to justice." That evening, Pike returned to her old office. On the wall, the Sarah Cantrell case board was labeled Closed Reference Archive. She removed the snow-covered Ford Pinto Polaroid, replacing it with a small print, Preserve, Review, Connect. 3 steps to truth. Then she closed the file, stored it in the cabinet, knowing it was no longer just a solved case, but an exemplary lesson, where science, memory, and patience met to fulfill justice's work. In spring 2013, 2 years after the Sarah Cantrell case officially closed, Inspector William J. Hardin, the man who first opened the file in winter 1973, passed away at age 72 at his Lansing suburb home. The sad news was announced internally in the Michigan State Police, with a brief bulletin line, "He leaves after 40 years in the field, legacy of persistence in cold case investigation." At his simple funeral, Naomi Pike attended, bringing a copy of the 2011 cold case report. She placed it beside his portrait, among silver medals and old duty cap. In a short eulogy, she said, "Without him no one would believe that girl never left Lake Gracie." After the funeral, Hardin's family agreed to donate all his notebooks, notes, and personal 1970s documents to the Michigan State Police Archives Museum in Lansing. Along with them, the original Sarah Cantrell case file, including Polaroids, scene maps, and the 1973 diary seized from Colin Dudley's home, was transferred from the cold case team storage to permanent archive. A small exhibit was created in the Legacy of Cold Cases room. At the opening, Pike and the state justice director cut the ribbon. In the central glass case, the original white Ford Pinto Polaroid lay tilted under dim light, frame reinforced to preserve the old silver paper. Below was a brass-engraved caption, "Last known image, Sarah Cantrell, Millbrook, Michigan, February 1973." Beside it, a small plaque quoted Hardin's notebook, "No evidence she ever left the lake area." Visitors lingered long before that photo. Though just a snow-covered car with faint light reflection, the chill of that 1973 morning seemed to linger. A museum guide whispered to students, "This photo was once deemed worthless." It took nearly 40 years for someone to look again and see an entire story. Inside the exhibit, the final introduction panel recounted the investigation journey from the 1974 file closure to DNA technology emergence and 2011 reopening. The ending line read, "The Cantrell case became the first model in Michigan's cold case program, proving justice does not vanish, it only needs patient seekers." That year, the museum partnered with the State Police Academy for a specialized training course titled Millbrook 1973. Lessons from the Gracie Lake case. In the course, young investigators reviewed the full technical file, learned long-term evidence handling, old photo scanning, and forensic expert coordination. Each session began with Hardin's notebook opening question, "If she never left the lake, where is she?" and ended with Pike's lecture recounting the journey to answer it. In September 2013, Pike returned to Lake Gracie for the first time since case closure. The lake was calm, water clear blue, willows shading the bank where the old Ford factory road once led. The entire site had been repurposed into a small memorial park with a brass plaque dedicated to the memory of Sarah L. Cantrell. May truth be preserved. Children biked on new paved paths, gentle waves lapped stones, and no one mentioned the 1973 winter as a haunting memory anymore. Pike sat on a wooden bench by the lake, opening Hardin's notebook copy she was allowed to keep. The last page had one line in blue ink, "Justice sometimes takes detours, but it always returns to the start." She closed the book, watching rippling water blend with afternoon light. Lake Gracie was now peaceful. No more yellow tape barriers, no floodlights or drill sounds from excavations. Only mirror-flat water reflecting late autumn Michigan sky. But somewhere beneath that water, in layers of earth and stone, traces remained of the story that shaped a generation of investigators, about a girl leaving home on a snowy morning, a man thinking he could bury guilt under concrete, and people who refused to forget. Each winter, when snow began covering the lake road, Millbrook residents reminded each other of the 1973 disappearance, not with fear, but gratitude. Because of it, they understood justice may slumber, but never dies. And in the small Lansing Museum, that Polaroid lay quietly under glass, where light reflected a faint gleam, like the last snow trace on the old Ford, waiting for someone to see and retell this story once more. The Sarah Cantrell story is not just a 4-decade case-solving journey, but a mirror reflecting modern American society, where justice, science, and human memory coexist in an imperfect but truth-seeking system. The 1973 Millbrook, Michigan case shows how seemingly small things, a hair strand, a dusty Polaroid, can become keys to reopen justice's door. In today's America, amid fake news, distorted information, and shortening collective memory, preserving evidence, both material and ethical, becomes more urgent than ever. Because Inspector Bill Harden did not discard the file, but kept every paper scrap, every hair sample, next generation 2011 technology had a chance to speak. The lesson: never underestimate persistence and integrity. Just as Naomi Pike used technology to re-examine an old photo and spot the overlooked shadow, we, in work or life, must learn to look back at the past with fresh eyes. In today's fast-moving America, many easily abandon the unexplained or accept silence as conclusion. But Sarah's story reminds silence is never the end. Every mistake, buried under time's concrete, can be illuminated again by honesty and advancing technology. From the once peaceful Lake Gracie to today's modern forensic centers, the lesson remains intact. Truth does not vanish. It only awaits patient finders. Thank you for joining us on the journey to restore justice for Sarah Cantrell, a case showing truth may slumber, but never disappears. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring seemingly forgotten cases still waiting to be retold in the next video.